Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last week of the course. Congratulations, you are almost there. This video is to give some general feedback and general comments on the lesson plans. I reviewed all of the lesson plans and gave you all feedback in a separate document. So if you haven't seen that yet, please take a look at that. But I did want to make some comments on generally what I saw in the lesson plans. I was really excited to see so many different techniques being used. I could really tell a shift in the thinking for many of you and how you've incorporated different things and just different strategies that you've used. I could really tell that most of you had taken the information that you've learned in the class and really applied it to that lesson plan. The one thing that was missing from just about everyone's lesson plan was learning theories that was used. That was the most common thing that was not included. So I did kind of expect that. We didn't spend as much time on learning theories as I would have liked, so I might change that up a little bit in the next course. And I think it's easiest to include a learning theory in a lesson plan when you're thinking about the IL framework and considering objectives. And you may have been thinking about the learning theories as you're writing your lesson plan, and maybe you just didn't include it because you weren't sure how to actually tie that theory to what you were doing. But that's okay. Just keep that in mind, and as a growth point for everybody, maybe read up a little bit more on some learning theories and think more intentionally about how you're implementing those learning theories in your lesson planning, and maybe try to tie that in the future. You can also note learning theories that are used during each different chunk and activity, because remember, you can use multiple learning theories within a single session. So you could consider, if you're not using one learning theory to drive the entire lesson, you could break it up by chunk and say in each chunk which learning theory you're using. So this is just something I recommend as you continue to go through this process and continue lesson planning throughout your librarian career. That's something that you could add in and learn a little bit more about on your own. And then a few other things that were missing, or I noticed weren't as strong across a lot of the lesson plans. The one thing most of you probably noted that the question on student-centered learning, are students creating information, not just consuming it? Most of you, that is not the case for most of the lesson plans, and that's okay. Student-centered learning, the reason that section was so big was because there's so many ways to get at student-centered learning. So if students aren't creating information in your lesson, that's okay. There are other ways to still be student-centered. Most of the lesson plans that I reviewed were skills-based. And so sometimes we can't always get them to that create level, especially when we only have a 30, 40, 50, even 60-minute session. It's hard to get students to create new information. So don't beat yourself up over that if you can't actually get them to that create level. That's a difficult level to get to. So don't try to force something. And I think that was kind of a theme that I saw in some of the lesson plans, that a lot of people were trying to cram so much into the lesson, all of these new ideas and new theories and new practices. But sometimes it's just not possible based on the time or the context. So you want to do the best you can to include most of these different things, but some things you just can't, and that's okay. Kind of along those lines, the activities was something that I wanted to discuss. We didn't do a whole lot of discussion on how to create good activities or how to create good assessments, and I realized that we didn't actually discuss the difference between activities and assessments. And activities can be assessments, but there should first be activities that support the learning of the objectives. And formative assessments should be separate activities that prove that students have learned something. So a formative assessment can be an activity, but there should be an activity before the formative assessment. So you should always have at least two activities. One activity that gets the students doing the thing, and then an assessment that helps prove that they learned how to do the thing through the activity. So a lot of lesson plans I saw just had a single activity that was the formative assessment, but there wasn't any way that students were actually able to practice or build that knowledge ahead of time. So you want to try to find a way to give students an opportunity to learn and practice before you assess them on that activity. So that's something else that you can think about building into your future lessons as well. And then the biggest thing that we all struggled with, and I think we all struggle with in general as librarians and in lesson planning, is backwards design. That was, I think, the biggest thing that we struggled with as a class. And maybe that's my fault for not emphasizing it enough in that module when we talked about backwards design. Because what I saw was a lot of lesson plans it seemed like there was just a standard intro to the library or intro to searching lesson that you already had, and then you just took all that and you plugged it into a different structure or format of a lesson plan, rather than really using backwards design to create a lesson. If you really think about it, do the students need a tour of the library website if they really just need to go directly to an 18th century literature database, if that's what they're working on? Do they really need to know about all the little details and tips and tricks about the library if maybe they don't even need to use the library website for that assignment that you're working on? And if you were to use backwards design, that helps you eliminate all of that extra stuff, the stuff that, yes, you would normally do, but you're not here because you want to do what you normally do. You're in this class because you wanted to do something different. You wanted to learn how to do a lesson plan. And if we're going to do really good, strong lesson plans, we want to try to use backwards design and really focus on that and make sure that everything that we have is leading towards that final assessment or final outcome or final thing, what it is that the students really need. So we really want to try to use backwards design to help us focus and tighten up our lessons. So spend some time going back to those ideas and making sure that you really are using backwards design and not just doing the same thing that you're used to doing, just putting it in a different format. I really recommend reading Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTeague. It's listed in the course readings. It's a book. I really recommend that you take a look at that. It's a good book to have as a resource for your entire department. So if you can do that, I definitely recommend it. And then the final thing with the lesson plans, I wanted to close this video to talk about closings. And I saw a range of different types of closings in the lesson plans. And the closings are a really easy, they're a really easy way to make sure that you kind of wrap everything up in a nice pretty bow and tie everything back to the objectives. The other stuff can be there too, things like, oh, these are next week's workshops, here's your homework, don't forget that you can email me, but also make sure that you bring it all the way back to that beginning and you remind them what they just learned, what they hopefully just learned. Bring it back to the objectives, because sometimes that can get a little lost by the students when you tell them at the beginning, then you do that. You want to reinforce it one more time by telling them at the end. Reaffirm those objectives, the outcomes, the goal, tie it all back together. And a really easy power up for closings is to flip it. Instead of you telling the students what they learned, have them tell you. Ask them, what did we just do? What are the 3 things that we just talked about today? And then you reaffirm it. So instead of you being up there telling them what they learned, have them tell you and use that as a way to close the lesson and summarize everything. That can be a nice way to just get one more little piece of student involvement in your lesson. But overall, I was really pleased with the lesson plans. I haven't had a chance to look at your revisions yet. I'll be doing that today and tomorrow. I have taken some peeks into the discussion boards to see how you're thinking about the process and your reflections that you've been posting, and I've seen some really good reflections in there, so I hope that you're finding that to be a valuable part of the process. And as you continue through the rest of this week, teaching your lesson, reflecting, and doing the wrap-up, feel free to reach out if you have questions. And I will probably do at least one more video to kind of wrap everything up at the end, but good luck this week and have fun teaching your lessons.